Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate the comments of the senator from Illinois, and I think it helps to set up some of my comments as well. We're talking about a bill here, D.C. voting rights, that has a lot to do with our Constitution. And I've got an amendment to that also has a lot to do with our Constitution, and that's the right of free speech, the right of freedom of the press, what we'll call the Broadcasters' Freedom Act. The interesting thing about the previous talk of my previous colleagues is he was talking about the urge to be mayors here in the Senate. It's interesting, after we just passed this massive stimulus bill where we were telling not only mayors but every governor in the country of what they had to do and how they need to spend their money and to control everything from education to health care. Yeah, we can't resist the urge to be governors and mayors. In fact, we can't resist the urge to substitute our opinions of what should happen to our whole constitutional form of government. It's interesting to hear about the guns amendment and the opinions there, and I respect the senator's opinion about the gun laws, what it should be. But the fact is that what we do here is not about our opinion. It's about our oath of office of protecting and defending the Constitution. The Constitution doesn't give me a right to decide who is going to bear arms. I mean, it's a basic constitutional right. It doesn't give us the right to use our own opinions and good intentions at every piece of legislation. One of the reasons as a country we're so much in debt, and this is attributed to both parties, is we've moved away from any constitutional moorings of limited government to the point now where it's whoever's opinion can prevail is what passes here. An appeal to the Constitution is almost irrelevant here. There's no way that you can interpret the Constitution to say that the Federal District of Columbia is going to have congressmen and senators. Now, I respect an opinion of anyone who says it shouldn't be that way, that people who pay taxes should have congressmen and senators. But the fact is, our oath of office is to defend the Constitution, not to employ our own opinions, to do what we think is right, to get money for our states. And that's a pretty simple judgment to make in this case. If we can't count, if we can't look at the language of the Constitution and see something so obvious, now sure, we don't like it. We don't like the way it's turned out. There are 600,000 people living here. And a lot of people with very good intentions say, well, they should have the same rights as states. But that's our opinion, and it's not the Constitution. What worries me about a lot of our rights that are given in the Constitution, particularly our Bill of Rights, not only the right to bear arms, which people's opinion is being substituted for the Constitution, but the same thing has happened with the right of free speech, the freedom of the press here in our country, which has been so instrumental to maintaining freedom and the ability of the American people to be vigilant over their government, finding out what is really going on here. Back in 1949, the federal government implemented what was called the Fairness Doctrine over concerns that with the relatively few number of radio stations across the country, that a diversity of opinion would not be heard. In substituting our own good opinion for that of the Constitution, there's some here in Washington who decided that we needed to referee what was said on radio. And if one opinion, a political opinion, was expressed, the Fairness Doctrine required that they have an opposite opinion also expressed. And the whole idea, the good intentions, were to create a diversity of points of view. The fact is, as many things we do here, it had exactly the opposite effect of what it was intended to do. It put a chilling effect on political speech. Because what radio station would want to deal with the liability of expressing opinion if someone else was going to come in and said you had to have somebody express a different opinion. It violated the right of free speech, and in the process actually put a chilling effect on the development of political points of view in radio across the country. In 1987, it had become obvious what this was doing. Thousands of radio stations were developing all over the country, and the Reagan administration overturned this so-called Fairness Doctrine, which was really a radio censorship act. And with that act gone, we have seen the development of radio talk shows all over the country. You can tune in anywhere, get all kinds of diversity of opinion, and frankly, it's become very annoying to a lot of congressmen and senators. There's nothing worse than going home and trying to tell people one thing and they actually find out that that's not the truth. And increasingly that's been happening with bills we're passing up here. When folks back home find out through talk radio, those guys didn't even read that bill. The front cover of that bill says it's not amnesty, but the bill says it is. The president says there are no earmarks, but you open it up and there are thousands of earmarks in the bill. The president says he's expanding our energy supplies, but then you look and see that they actually have a drilling moratorium that we didn't know about. Talk radio has become very annoying to politicians who don't want Americans to know the truth. So increasingly a number of people here in Congress are looking back to that Fairness Doctrine and thinking, we need to bring that back. We need to censor radio talk shows. We need to create that liability, that risk, every time that someone freely expresses an opinion, that station needs to know that they're liable to make sure another opinion is expressed. And who's going to decide what should be expressed? The governors and the mayors here in Washington. In fact, what we're finding out is so many people on the other side, they can't resist the urge to be founding fathers. They want to change the Constitution and change what it means and ignore it. But folks, the freedom of speech is so important. And the fact that people here in this Senate who swear an oath to the Constitution are actually advocating bringing back radio censorship and certainly eventually applying it, I'm sure, to the blogosphere and the web, they're not going to stop with radio talk shows. We need to act here to make sure that this oppression, this tyranny, is not reimposed on the American people. Because it's not just important to protect what radio talk show hosts can say. What we're really trying to protect is what millions of Americans are free to listen to. Different opinions, facts, information about where to find more complete information about what's really going on here. And the primary reason that more and more Americans are standing up and they're outraged about what's going on here is because they're finally finding out the truth about what we're doing, of how much money we're spending, how much we're borrowing, the pork barrel earmarks that we're sending all over the country, basically changing the whole mission of the federal government from one that stands up for the national interest and constitutional government to one that is essentially trying to run local governments and state governments and to rearrange our Constitution. The Federal Communications Commission could actually re-implement this radio censorship idea without Congress. And that's why my amendment that I'll introduce tomorrow, what we call the Broadcasters Freedom Act, will prohibit the Federal Communications Commission from bringing back any part of this radio censorship that they called at one time the Fairness Doctrine. Now, some here will say it's not germane to this debate on D.C. voting rights. But the D.C. voting rights are about the Constitution and whether or not we're going to follow it. And if we don't respect the Constitution on one issue, why should we respect it on another? And the fact that people at the FCC, here in Congress, are talking about bringing it back means it is germane to this discussion. It's germane to everything we do here. The right to freedom of speech, the freedom of the press is so foundational to our form of government and our way of life that it's germane to everything that we do here. This amendment is so important to what we do because if we can't get the American people informed and engaged and activated and get them to stand up and express their outrage, this government, this Congress, is going to continue to violate the Constitution at every turn, to substitute their opinion, whether it be the First Amendment or Second Amendment. Anytime their opinion is different than the Constitution, their belief here and the prevailing belief here in Congress is that if you can pass something, then it's legal. It doesn't matter if it violates the Constitution. But I tell you what will matter. If the American people know what we're doing, they're going to stand up, they're going to email, and they're going to call, and they're going to express their outrage to these people who are taking our constitutional rights every day, are going to hear from the people back home, and they're going to back down, or they're going to be brought home at the next election. That's why the radio freedom, the freedom of the press, talk radio, bloggers, cable TV, all these alternative media that are going around the New York Times and the other liberal press and taking the truth and the facts to the American people is something that we have to protect with our lives here in Congress. The Broadcasters' Freedom Amendment that will be added to this tomorrow is critically important to what we do here. And I urge all of my colleagues, don't buy these lame arguments that it's not germane to this constitutional debate right now. Don't buy this argument that it's not relevant because no one's bringing it up. Because we've seen what people can sneak into bills that we don't get a chance to read. We need to make it a law that the FCC or this Congress cannot implement any aspect of the Fairness Doctrine. That's what this amendment is about. And I urge my colleagues to take the Constitution seriously, to take this amendment seriously, and vote for it and show the American people that we're going to stand up for their constitutional rights.